Very warm greetings in the very blessed name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Let us turn our Bibles to Joshua chapter 13. Now, many of you woke up this morning to exciting news, isn't it? News that rock the world, news that over the last few days, people keep reading with bated breath and wondering what will happen next. Who will be the president of if not one of the most powerful nation on earth? He would be the most powerful person on earth in that sense, the President of the United States. So finally this morning, the results are out. At least for one person, life has changed drastically. He has lost. He is now no longer to be in that position as the United States President. Now the question is this. Everyone is asking, from now to the time he leaves office, I think someone mentioned in the news, until the 20th of January. Now till then, how would he respond? What will he do? Will he accept the change? He has said many things about what happens if he loses. Now what will happen next? The world also watches with bated breath. Now it is timely in chapter 13, verse 1. If you look at verse 1. Now Joshua was old and stricken in years. And the Lord said unto him, Thou art old and stricken in years, and there remaineth very much land to be possessed. Joshua now himself was going to go through a major change in his position, in what he is going to do next. Because God is going to tell him to divide the land, as we've read in verses 6 and 7. Look at verses 6 and 7. Now, the inhabitants of the country of Lebanon and so on, and he says, Them will I drive out from before the children of Israel. Only do what, Joshua? Time has come to a change in your life. Only divide thou it, which is the land, by lot unto the Israelites for an inheritance, as I have commanded thee. Verse 7, Now therefore divide this land. So Joshua is also at a juncture of his life where he will be told, it's time to transit to another role. It's time to transit to do something else. It's time now to have a different plan according to my plans. Now, interestingly, we quote in our program sheet the Westminster Confession of Faith week by week. All right? We just take the passage chronologically week by week. Guess what it is this week? Please turn to your program sheet. So, the providence of God would have this be this week's Westminster Confession of Faith quotation, chapter 23. Can you see in your program sheet? Westminster Confession of Faith, chapter 23 of Civil Magistrate. This is our reading for today. God, the supreme Lord and King of all the world, hath ordained civil magistrates to be under him over the people for his own glory and for the public good, and to this end hath armed them with the power of the sword for the defense and encouragement of them that are good, and for the punishment of evil doers. We have been learning over the last few weeks. The passage in chapter 12 was about clearly God, our God, is the King of Kings. Repeated mention of famous king, powerful kings, magistrates of the world. But our God is the Lord and King of all the earth. He is the one who brings up one and puts down another. No matter how powerful they are, it does not matter. He is the ruler of the universe. Then in the second part of chapter 12, we learned that he is a faithful King of Kings to us. This king that we serve, he is very faithful. All that he promised the children of Israel, all came to pass according to his word. As long as they obeyed him, God never, ever failed them. The King of Kings, who is our King, the faithful King, as we serve him. But now, Joshua has come to a point where the King of Kings speaks to him at the end of all the battles. Joshua, you are old. Now, in fact, this chapter is, well, at least up to verse 7 is interesting. There are repeated phrases. And when God repeats, it is an emphasis for us to take note. Look at chapter 13, verse 1. Notice. Now it begins like that. Now Joshua was old and stricken in years, and the Lord said unto him. So the commentary is the situation of Joshua. What did God say to Joshua? Notice it's exactly the same words as what God used to introduce Joshua's state. Same words. Old and stricken in years. It's repeated. So, in fact, in the way God speaks to him, thou art old, thou. There is an emphasis on Joshua, I'm speaking to you. I've said many times, in the Hebrew language, it's very precise. This thou is taken aside means, Joshua, focus, pay attention. I'm talking to you. This is about you. Something is going to change, Joshua. You are old. Stricken in age, stricken in years means he has now entered into old age, and age has caught up with him. What we've been reading so far is Joshua fighting battle. Our image of Joshua, strong, young man, leading the army, conquering giants. But this is now a picture of Joshua being what most calculate as about 100 years old. Now Joshua, as we all know, is going to, as we see in the later chapters, God says Joshua will pass away at 110 years old. And means this will be a good 10 years that Joshua had. In chapter 12, verse 6, and Moses, the servant of the Lord, and the children of Israel smite the people, them, and Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave it for possession unto the Reubenites and Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh. Now, God mentioned Moses, and God mentions Moses conquer on the eastern side of Jordan. Remember that? And then he mentions Joshua's conquest on the western side. Moses was told to step aside. We know why. Moses started well, but along the way, Moses disobeyed God. He did not continue so well. And as a result, we know God say, you will not be the one that will lead the children of Israel across to the promised land on the other side. You will not be the one that will take the land with them. Joshua will be the one. When Moses was told by God to stop, it was recorded Moses was very healthy. His eyesight better than you and I today. His health very robust. But in Joshua's case, it was not sin. Until this point, we read Joshua's faithfulness, his absolute obedience to the Lord. Very careful, doing whatever God commanded Moses for him to do. He did everything. We read the commentary many times. Joshua was asked to transit, not because of sin. Joshua was asked to transit. Why? Why did God ask Joshua to do this? Why did God ask Joshua, now Joshua, you are old, now divide the land? Because God's plan moving forward is no longer for Joshua to lead and fight and conquer the rest of the land. We've said this many times. Now, look at chapter 11, verse 23. Chapter 11, verse 23. So Joshua took the whole land according to all that the Lord had said unto Moses. But I thought Joshua took the whole land. But here, God says in verse 13, verse 2, this is a land yet remaineth. There is a land that yet remaineth. So he said, there are remaining land to be taken. What God has always said, and I've been explaining that, the majority of the land has been conquered by the children of Israel, led by Joshua. Their power, their ability to form consolidated groups, as they did in the past, is no longer there. They would not be able to resist the children of Israel. By and large, they are an all-powerful, overwhelming force already. But God says there are pockets. That's why you'll read from chapter 13, verses 3 to 6. There are pockets, as I've mentioned in previous messages, that the children of Israel, the tribes themselves, as they get the land, when they live there, the individual tribes are supposed to do the cleanup. And they will not fail, because God is with them. And God has already broken the power of the enemies in the land. You see, God's plan now is to do that. Why did God say, stop? Joshua, you are old. Now you stop. My plan, and the title today is Fulfilling the King's Purposes. We've been studying, He's the King of Kings. He is the King of the land. He gave the land to them. And the King says, moving forward, this is how the land will be conquered. The King now gives the edict, the commandment to his subject, to his general. No longer, Joshua, will you lead the people as one united people going out to fight, as we have been reading. Now is divide and conquer, in another sense, all right? You get it? People say divide and conquer, that divide the enemies and conquer. But here, the king's plan is this. Now you divide. You part Israel. And then they will conquer. That is, the parting of the people, the parting of the land, was the plan of the king. And then the people must fulfill that purpose. Now, when we study about God being the King of Kings, we have to come to one realization. It means we are His subjects. Even what is happening in the world, it is not about who is more eloquent to promote themselves and therefore became president. It is very clear. The Bible says God sets up one and puts down the other, and men must subject themselves to the Supreme One. You see, God's plan is this. The thing is this, my friends. When you read all this, you and I must come to this state in life where you must know that the King has already planned out certain things for this world, for this church, for your life, for your family. He has a plan. Now, it's regardless of what we have been doing. But if it comes a point where God says, this is the plan moving forward, then we submit and fulfill His plans, not ours. To Joshua, this is a change. This is about his old age. Old age will catch up with all of us one day. When we get old, things changes. Things will change in our life. How will you and I accept that change that God brings into our lives? We sing King of Kings and all that. How will we accept it? Well, we say, well, this is for elderly. No, the point is this. The point is, even for young people, even for our church, at some point, God has already a plan. And when that time comes and that plan changes, how will we respond? How will we respond? Fulfilling the purpose of the King is all about this, my friend. Begin well. Joshua began well. All the while, even with Moses, he began well. He continued well. but fulfilling the king's purposes in our life. When it comes to the most critical part is how we end, my friends. How we end. Will we end well? What did Joshua do? What did Joshua do? What do you think? So we all are wondering, what will the current, the president, what would Mr. Donald Trump do from now to the 20th of January, if that is the correct date? What is he going to do? Is he going to refuse to leave the White House? Now, some say that if he refuses, so some predict, then the Secret Service will have to escort him out and so on and so on. And then he's talking about he wants to raise lawsuits to say that voting is not fair and so on, all right? What is going to happen? What is going to happen? So we read this. God told Joshua. He told Joshua. This is repeated command. How repeated? Now, look at verse 6. Look at verse 6. Now, the last part of verse 6, he says, I will drive them from before the children of Israel. So God reminded him first. Joshua, please always remember, all right, Joshua? I, the king, is the one who drive out the people. Yes, you've been fighting, but it's never been you. It has always been me. Sometimes we do not want to accept God's purposes, God's will, because we somehow think it is me. It has been me. It was me. But God reminded Joshua first, I'm the king, I'm the one. All right, so what about you, Joshua, at this stage, at your age, at this change? Now look at how God puts it in verse 6. Only, he begins, only divide thou. This is the only thing I expect you to do, Joshua. Only. And don't think of anything else, Joshua. This is the only thing I want you to concentrate on from this change onwards. Now, sometimes God brings certain changes in our lives. It is not random. Just like the children of Israel, from the day one, this was God's plan. And now it is time to execute that part of the king's plan. So he said, this is the only thing you need to focus now. He has a different job. His job is no longer leading people in one group and fighting. His job now is to divide the land. Only divide. Only divide. And this word divide is in command language, command mode. And he repeats. And he says, only divide, and end of verse 6, as I have commanded thee. Then he says again, now therefore divide. You know, when your boss talks to you, and he makes it very clear, and he repeats, and he says, you. I think it is a very strong emphasis that it is not for us to resist. It is not for us to resist. This word, divide, look at chapter 13, verse 6. Divide thou. Now, as I've mentioned many times, and I say I want to bring up the Hebrew language, not to show off that I'm very good, all right? I just want to let you know how God is talking to them, so that we know if we are standing there, this is what we are hearing. Now, when God says divide, this first divide in chapter 6, in verse 6, it is not only in command mode. It is a specific command mode. Now, let's stay on this. God commanded. You know, when changes happen in our lives, it's a command of God that we submit to it. Don't resist it. I mean, in English, it's difficult to say command. All right, parents, you want your child to do something, and you want to command your child. How do you say it in an English word? Maybe you say, wash your hands. Wash. Is there a different word, command mode, wash? No. The only thing we can do is maybe shout louder. Or maybe more firm, wash your hands, right? Then your child says, wash. They know, oh, this is serious. I better pay attention. It's a command already. And not only you say, wash your hands, and I command you. The kid knows not only the tone is a command, and the parents repeat, I'm commanding. Please don't misunderstand, I'm commanding. So here when God says divide, command language already, and yet he says, as I have commanded, it's very strong. And then in verse 7, now divide, another divide. Same word, but also command, but in another form of the command. What am I trying to explain? In verse 6, that divide, that command of divide, when Joshua heard that in the Hebrew language, it is very clear. This particular usage is to tell him, Joshua, you participate. I am not giving you a suggestion. I'm not asking you, Joshua, think about this. Step aside. Joshua, think about this. Take up this role. Joshua, think about this. Now, don't go to battle based on a whole group. All right, Joshua, think about this. Think about dividing the land and getting the people now to do that. No. God is saying, I am not telling you have a choice, Joshua. You are simply to participate in this thing that I've planned. This is the king's purpose. You participate in it. That is that particular mode of the command. So, dear friends, when God at a certain point in our lives brings certain changes, do not take it as if we can resist and we refuse. We want to reject. Now the next one, then in verse 7, this divide, same word, also a command, but now the particular usage of this is about you transit, you move, you go into this new situation. In other words, when Joshua stood there and hear all this being told to him, now God chose this language which is very precise for us. He is hearing this. Joshua, you are old. My plan moving forward is to divide the land and divide and conquer. So Joshua, you participate in that, and your new participation is you do the dividing. Not anymore what you are used to. Leading, fighting, forefront. No, Joshua, now this is another role for you to participate in. That is why you look at verse 6. Now he says, I will drive them out from before the children of Israel. Only divide, only you participate. God says, I, the king, decides what to do. You are a participant. Why are we studying King of Kings in our life? We study King of Kings, but we want to do our own will in our own lives. For ourselves, for our family, for our children, for our choices. No. Participant. Subjects. Soldiers in the king's army are just followers. They don't argue with God. So Joshua, I am the one who gives. You participate. And Joshua, in verse 7, now therefore, please move. Take up this new job that I'm giving you. Now, one of the problems with our lives is this. Sometimes when God changes things, we feel, or rather we do not want to accept, we do not want to move. Why? Because we think that this change is a lower role. This change is a lesser role. This change is a less exciting role. Or this change is something that, hang on, it's not something that my track record, my experiences, my accumulated abilities will be best used. Isn't it true? And therefore, we feel this is a lesser role. Joshua's response, what was it? What was it? What do you think it was? Actually, think about this. Those of you who've been paying attention, did Joshua divide the land? Did Joshua obey? The whole world is waiting. Will Trump step aside? Will Trump transit? Actually, these passages, they are not in places not arranged chronologically. Understand that. God is giving accounts, record accounts, the storyline. Look at chapter 11, verse 23. What did God say about Joshua? Look at verse 23. And so, chapter 11, verse 23, so Joshua took the whole land according to all that the Lord said unto Moses, and Joshua gave it for an inheritance unto Israel according to their divisions by the tribes. Joshua did that. You see, even along the way, when God was describing the battles, God fast-forwarded his commentary about Joshua. He fast-forwarded and made a commendation of Joshua. Joshua took the land, and Joshua divided the land, and Joshua gave out the land according to what he has been told. Do you understand what is happening? Look at verse 12, verse 7. Same. God commended Joshua, verse 7, and these are the kings of the country which Joshua and the children of Israel smote on this side of Jordan on the west, from Baal-gad in the valley of Lebanon, even unto the valley, and so on and so on. And what does he say? Which Joshua gave unto the tribes of Israel for a possession according to their divisions. God again, in describing Joshua's conquest, fast-forwarded, bypassed the conversation in chapter 13, verses 1 to 7. He bypassed this conversation. In other words, chapter 13's conversation was something that happened, and Joshua did it after that. No need to wonder, did Joshua did it? Did Joshua obey the king's command? Did Joshua fulfill the king's purposes? Did he or did he not? Like the whole world is wondering now, will he or will he not? Before all this conversation, God commended Joshua repeatedly. Repeatedly. Every time God mentions that, he's saying, Joshua simply obeyed the king's purposes. Now, dear friends, as we go through life, as I've mentioned, as you age, there may be some changes that God may bring into your life. It could be a major health change. It could be a financial change. It could be losses. Whatever it may be. Could be change in roles. Because you become father, then you become grandfather. Things change. Even in areas of service. You must realize one thing. From the time before they crossed over, God already told Moses, the land will be divided. Joshua also knew the land will be divided. The ultimate purpose has always been to divide the land, and then the individual tribes will clean up the land. Has always been God's purpose. Whatever that you face has always been God's purpose when it comes to that juncture in your life. And that is what we must accept. And we must not get angry at God. Later we will see what happens if we don't accept. But for now, let's look at maybe other examples. What about families? Now when God says, Joshua, you're stricken in years, and there remain very much land to be taken, and you go divide. God is explaining a change, as I've said many times. This change is ordained by the king. That is his purpose now moving forward. If something happens in your family, again, it is something that God has ordained. It's just that you didn't see it. You didn't think it will come to that stage. You see, for Joshua, fighting battles is all that he knew. It's all that he liked. No, I don't know whether he liked, but that is what has been recorded. That's what he keeps doing. Sometimes we can be so used to about certain things in our family. This has always been what it is in our family. This is what we kept ourselves busy with. This is what we have had all our lives. And these are the successes that we experience. But at a certain point, God may make certain changes. But it has always been His purpose. You and I must remember that is the ultimate purpose. I've reached that stage. And in fact, everything that God has been doing in my life from the past until now, God is going to now transit me into this new change, into this new phase, into this new area of work that He expects me now to do. Meaning even to let go. Let go. Students, it's the same. You say, these are for the elderly. It's good. This is all stricken in age, stricken in years. I think I'll take a nap this week. Now this is about what Joshua has been doing all his life. Same for you, young person. You may be pursuing something. Well, from young, you've always had a dream. This is my dream. This is what I want to be. When I reach that age, when I used to work in the world and when I interview people, I say, well, what do you see yourself to be in years to come? What is the thing that you want to aspire to? And invariably, maybe it's a standard university taught answer. They say, in 5 years' time, in 7 years' time, in 10 years' time, I want to be in this position, I want to be doing that, I want to. All right? So many of us have our dreams. But what if all your life you work towards that, and actually you've been doing those things, and then it came a point where God may not say you're stricken in age, stricken in years. Maybe God says you're stricken with cancer. You're stricken with a particular illness that incapacitates you. Or God may say, now there is this change, my subject. Now, all the things that you've been working towards, all the things that you've been dreaming of, and now you come to a point where it is within grasp. Within grasp of Joshua to be the number one man in Israel. But God says, divide. And you just have for your own, and then you become nobody. And then you say, but that is what I've been wanting to be. A manager, a director, a pilot, or whatever it is, right? And God says, that was not my ultimate purpose for you. Everything that you have done, forget about it. How would you respond, my friend? This is about when the time comes, what will our spirit be? What will our heart be? Now, if we are people, and I would say this is the greatest test. This is Joshua's greatest test. And young person, when you reach that stage where God says, this is my purpose for you, and you suddenly realize it's not what it is, and all the experience that you've built up, and God says, no, this is not for you to continue in. What is our spirit? That is the key thing. And that will determine how well you and I end our life on earth. That will depend on our spirit. The reason why, my friends, the reason why we ever did anything in our lives would determine the spirit in which we will respond when God says, stop. Do this now. And the doing of this can mean letting go of many things. How will we end? What will our spirit be? Depends on all the while. That is why I say this is our test. All the while, if we have been doing things because of our name, because we enjoy the position, the status, the attention, the rewards in the working world, for example. In taking care of your family, for example, in serving in church, for example, if it has always been, even doing very good things, even being useful to God, even spiritual things, but as long as it has been because I thought this is what I will continue in and it will be my status in life, we will not be like Joshua. We will not end well. We may relent, right? We may relent, but it will only last so long. You will eventually flare up. You will eventually get angry, and all sorts of problems will start. Are you willing to accept the changes? Now, I try to think of an example, all right? So, I'm not saying mother-in-laws are bad, all right? And neither am I trying to make a joke out of it. But I think of real life, something that is close to heart to many of, I won't say many mothers, but it can happen, all right? And we see this in families. Now, a mother naturally loves children. Now, a mother who from very young bore the son into this world and raised the son, went through a lot of difficulties for the son, sleepless night, many battles, many sacrifices, and then cooks for the son, cares for the son, and then as the child grows up. Now, mothers, if you're honest, what is your biggest nightmare? Your biggest desire that it will not happen one day? Maybe it is, my son is going to get married and I will no longer be the number one woman in his life. I'm not saying all mothers are like that, all right? Don't come and throw things at me afterwards. It's like, oh, I wish my son won't get married. Then I can always care for him, cook for him. And then finally your son gets married. And when your son gets married, there is still this unwillingness to let go. Because you've been doing that all your life. You still want to cook for your son. You still want to care for your son. What's going to happen? You know what? In many families, it ends up with a lot of problem. God is wise. God always says, in Genesis 2:24, leave father and mother. There's a reason. I'm not saying leave means don't care. All right? Now you form your own family unit, your own headship, own authority, own decisions. Parents give good advice, listen, but you have to make your own decision. But when the mother would not let go, when it's time to transit, now it's time to give away my role to someone else. If the mother does not, let me ask you what will happen. The son, number one, will live a miserable life. Right? You'll be torn between two. Because your mother will make it difficult for you, your wife will make it difficult for you. You will face challenges. There'll be competition. So what I'm trying to say is, the people that God says now it is time for them to do the work, they will suffer when you and I refuse to submit to God's his current purpose moving forward. What else will happen? Competition, isn't it true? Competition will happen. Your wife cooks, I don't know what, chicken chop, your favorite, all right? And then your mom will say, chicken chop, all right, I'll cook chicken chop as well. And try to make my chicken chop nicer. And then you end up chicken chop for the whole week because of competition, right? And then there'll be back and forth. People will suffer. Not only that, you will be very miserable. The mother who would not let go and say, now it's time for my daughter-in-law. My husband handed him, her father handed her over. Now it's time for her to take care of my son. That is what it is going to be. If she doesn't submit to now the change, she will be miserable. Every night she'll be thinking, how can I make sure my son will continue to like my food, like the clothes I buy him, like How can I compete? It's a miserable life. You see, when God told Joshua this, there was no record. Because at this, about 100 years old, for the next 10 years, from now until the point you read where Joshua died, you do not hear Joshua making things difficult for the children of Israel. He focused on transiting. He focused on passing on. He accepted the will of God. In other words, he was willing to fulfill God's purpose in his life. But as long as we've always done things for ourselves, when it comes to that point, we will struggle. And when we struggle, it is still not too late. Learn to be Joshua. Lord, I gladly move on. You see, to Joshua's mind, it's very easy for him to feel general, commander of hundreds of thousands of people, always winning battles. Kings around the nation see him as the very powerful general. Can you imagine how difficult it is for him to now just be stepping into the shadow and divide land? Why would Joshua respond this way? How could you and I, when the time comes, God says, look, young person, you've been studying all this. This is what you want in life. You reach that point, but I say that is not for you. How can you respond rightly and not fail and not fall until the end? Now, when I was called, coming to Australia is the last thing on my mind. As I've mentioned many times, I do not even come here for holidays. Right? It's not particularly a place that I like to be in. And all my life, I've worked in Singapore and like to be in Singapore. I had my likes. I had my dreams in the place of work. But when God called me and said, all right, now it's time. You have to go to serve me in the full-time ministry. It doesn't matter what I liked to do, what I've achieved by His grace. It does not matter. When the time comes, I will just have to say, Lord, yes, all right, I have to put this aside and go to the full-time ministry. And then in the full-time ministry, at the last year of my Bible college, I had to know God's will. Where? I do not want to leave Singapore. I want to be with my family. Now, please look at verse 1. God says, there remaineth yet very much land to be possessed. Now I can think, well, God, there are so many things, so many ministries in Singapore, so many churches in Singapore that doesn't have a pastor yet. Yet remaineth many things to do for you here, Lord, right? But God makes it clear. It is BPCWA in Perth. I too have to put it aside. I'm not saying this to praise myself. I'm just saying that every one of us will come to a point. I'm not saying you will be called to full-time ministry. I'm just saying every one of us will come to a juncture. Whether it's something you pursue and been studying for, but God says it is not for you. How can we respond rightly? Number one, Joshua responded rightly because all the while in Joshua's service, it does not matter what the role was. It does not matter what he achieves. It does not matter. Because in his mind, it's always the King of Kings who have been the one who win victories, not Joshua. Whatever it is that you've achieved, look at them as something that God is the one who does it. Number one. Number two, whatever it is that God says now it is your life. Don't compare. God, I compare my battle days versus now, and I just stand there and this is your land, this is your land, this is your land. Giving out land that I conquered. Do not compare what you have been doing, what you've been achieving, and what you want. It does not matter what you and I want, desire, hope for, dream, worked for, achieved so far. It does not matter. We just view as Joshua view. King, I'm your subject. O King of Kings, what do you want? Oh, this? All right. Whatever the King of Kings puts into your life next, or ordains for the rest of your life, is wonderful, is glorious for His sake, is a privilege, is important. But when we begin to compare, well, working in the world, I can make a lot of money, I have a lot of influence in the world. Well, I think that is better. It does not matter what we think is better. What the king says is what we do, that is the best. You see, it does not matter what Joshua liked, what he has been doing. It does not matter where Joshua is. What am I saying? Some of us may have this thinking. If God doesn't give me this here in Australia, if God doesn't make me a high-ranking manager in Australia, then I will go and be one in Singapore or in Malaysia or in wherever or in another state instead of Perth. If God doesn't want me to be this, then I'll go somewhere else and be what I want to be. Now, Joshua can begin to feel, from life experience and from what I've been doing, and what I notice I'm really good at is actually leading people in battle. Then I began to realize I'm very good. My strategies have been quite clever. So maybe in Israel there's no such role for me now. No problem. I won't fight with Israel. I'll go join other nations, use my skills, and in those nations continue to lead battles, continue to lead people and do battles, because that is what I like and I do best. I'll go there and continue to be a general. Do these thoughts cross your mind? Now I've seen, even in Singapore, where I was a Bible college student, where I served in some churches, I've seen people who want to get married very much. And they came to a point in life where they realize they're getting old. They want to get married, but nothing is happening. Well, if that is God's will, that is God's will. It comes to a point where God says, now this is what it is moving forward. But they would not accept. They would leave the church because they say, all the guys here, after years, still don't notice me, still not interested in me. They are interested in other girls. So they say, well, then I'll go to another church to do my will, to achieve my desire, which I've been having since childhood. And they do not care whether that church is sound or not sound. They just go. I'm not saying it is wrong to change church. I'm not saying it's wrong to want to get married. I'm not saying that. But what is God's will when it comes to the point when it's something that is very different from what you've been anticipating? Will you think that, well, I still can have my will and fulfill my purpose? If the king's purpose is not that for me in Australia or in wherever it is, I will go somewhere else to fulfill it. Will you think like that? You will become a very miserable person. That's why I said just now, a person who knows it's time to change but would not, will eventually be a miserable person. And even when we submit wholeheartedly, genuinely, and really see, God, this is, whatever the King of Kings dishes out to me, it's wonderful, even though it's different now. As long as we don't see that, we might submit initially, but over time, I said just now, we will be miserable and we will flare up. Now I want to take it to church. To church. We have recently gone through changes in this church. Just COVID-19 alone are inevitable changes. God brought us to this point. Look at the way we are sitting. Are we going to accept this? Are we going to just say, Lord, we'll make the best of it, and this is how we will worship? But I want to also mention the changes. We did part, didn't we? We recently divided the English and Chinese congregation, didn't we? God has moved us to this stage. It's obvious, it's clear, it's inevitable. The children of Israel were also to divide, but in that division, they had the same purpose. It was still to grow the kingdom of God. It is still to do battles for the Lord, but they were divided. They were told to divide and then to individually grow, take the land. Do we accept that? I do not know if there's any that still resist. Sometimes I still hear, this Chinese and English thing. Joshua can say, this division thing. Isn't it better they will all stay together? Joshua could say that. There are some that say, it's better to stay together. The children of Israel could say that too. Now, if Joshua would not submit and Joshua would not help in the transitioning, he could be the problem maker. He could stir people against God's plan. We have to accept. Yes, what we are used to, what I am used to as a pastor, it does not matter. What God has used us to do in the past as one big congregation does not matter. What matters is God's ultimate purpose. What is moving forward? To resist is to resist the king's purpose. And it doesn't end well. Now also, we know that many in the past has left our church because they don't agree with the direction of the church. Some have left because of this as well. Now I just hope that those who stay, well, number one, I hope that those who have left do not cause problems externally. And I hope that those who stay do not fall into the folly of listening. When God says this is the direction for this church moving forward, do not fall into the folly of listening and becoming that catalyst to go against the king's purpose for us to fulfill moving forward. I say I want to preach openly, directly, because I think this is a timely, arranged message that is very relevant to our church at this point of time. There's no use studying the Word of God and not applying it to our lives as individuals, as families, as a church. But you see, like Joshua, God repeatedly say, and Joshua divided it as an inheritance unto Israel according to their divisions by their tribes. God keeps repeating this about Joshua. That is a very great commendation, my friends. Let me ask you, what will God say to you and I when we are old? When we reach this stage, or even at a stage of life where God says something is going to change? What will God say to you and I? You see, the fact that God is having this conversation with Joshua says one thing, that Joshua has still been serving faithfully. Joshua has been serving faithfully. And God says, Joshua, you have been serving faithfully, now you're old, now it's time to move to the next thing. A different thing. God did not say, Joshua, what's wrong with you? You're old and stricken in age. And all this while, you've wasted your life. No, God says, time to move from what you have been faithfully doing. It's a great commendation. Young person, let me ask you, when God at one point will speak to you, what will it be? I'm not talking about dreams and vision, all right? When God will now begin to work in your life, is God going to say to you, well, now it's time to move? You have aspirations, but this is what I want you to do moving forward. Or is God going to ask you, hey, what's wrong with you? What have you been doing with the time, the talents, the abilities that I've been giving you? What have you been doing with it? Or God says, well done, now move to the next thing. Which one will it be? It's not only ending well for Joshua, which is very important, it shows God's commendation shows that he has been doing well. Doing well. Will God give us this commendation? Now, I'm very thankful for many in the church. One thing that I try my best by the grace of God to do since I came to BPCWA is this particular thing. Never to make myself indispensable, but to make sure that when the time comes, if I could no longer preach, I can transit and the next person will take over without problems. Because we should never live our lives in a way where we will hold on to this, and even when I'm old, I will be the only one who knows how to do it. God says, I am the one who will give the land. Let us not be so foolish to think I will be indispensable if I do things this way. Why do I do that? I make sure that every ministry have processes in place. I make sure all these processes are put in the church, not your personal PC at home, in the church's drive. Why? Because I realized when I took over, there was hardly anything. And the people would say, let's see how he dies. The people who were doing all the rostering, all the processes behind, they just dropped everything, right? Pastor, right? I'll leave it to you. I literally have to beg them, can you please stay and do this for another few more weeks? Give me 2 weeks to figure out how you do it. All right, but nothing. Would not tell me. You see, when we can be doing things for God, but all the while is only if I'm doing it. When it's time to transit, I'm not going to do a good job. Let's see how they die. Joshua could do that. Wow, transit to them. Well, I won't divide the land. Let's see how the children of Israel will fare without me. I learned that lesson. Church should never be like that. Make sure everything has processes. And no one owns those things. It's made common to everyone in church that serve. I make sure that there is backup for everyone. I do not like anyone to be the sole information controller, including myself. Whatever I have is in the church drive. Why? Because we must always have this attitude when we serve. It is always ready to be passed on if God wants me to move on. Not selfish. There have been people who serve. When you say, can you please give us these templates? You can ask for months, for years. The deacons pleaded for it. Never came. It's in their own repository. Because they are people who will not say when God says it's time to move, time to change, time to pass on. No, I would not. Very foolish. Do not end this way, my friends. If you're serving well and God is using you, do not serve this way. The test is how will you hand over? Will you be like Joshua? Joshua simply divided land according to the division that God told him to be bringing forward. That's it. And I make sure that everyone is used to the idea of backup. Every ministry that I serve, you ask the ministry leads. Every time there's a backup. Means no one will serve, I will be the, you know what people say? Information is power. I will be the one who knows how to run this program, who knows all the background. I will be the one. And without me, don't tell me to divide it out because I'm the only one who knows how to do it. That is not the attitude of Joshua. He simply divided according to God's plan. And I'm very thankful in this church. As I always say, we are very careful who we put up. By and large, all the leads in this church do not serve like that. They readily, happily have backups, openly share everything. When I say, all right, next year someone else will do it, they happily help transit, give all the data, and continue to help. That is this passage. How do you and I serve God? Why do you and I serve God? That is important. I say this to all that are serving. That must be our heart. That is why we have so many people serving in the background. We do not want to put all the eggs in one basket. We want to make sure that everyone who serves because of that. The test is what? when it's time to transit. That is the test. In the test, last year I was asked to be maybe teacher in holiday Bible program. This year, what? I'm asked to be craft maker. What is the attitude? Joshua can say, I was general, God. What? Now be divider of land? Where is the glory? From young, serve the Lord with the right spirit. God will send us out to labor. Why would we labor? When we are tired, when we are stretched, why do we labor? Is it the title of today's message? To fulfill the king's purpose. Why do you pursue anything in this world? To fulfill the king's purpose. Why are you seeking anything for your family and for your child? To fulfill the king's purpose. That is all. That is why we labor. And if we do that, we will be like Joshua. No problem, Lord. Next. Let us rise to sing the closing hymn. 466. 466. 466.